Darkness drapes the land as torchlight flickers off rivers stained by blood. Smoke rises from monasteries that once harbored art and prayer, now left gutted and defiled by raiders who come not as mere plunderers, but as conquerors. Along these ruined paths, fearful whispers speak of an English king named Æthelred, a man already weighed by sorrow and haunted by the ghost of a murder. Across the sea and the estuaries, more Viking ships arrive, unstoppable in their hunger for silver and power. The people look for strength, for unity, but find in their king a man who seems ill-fitted for crisis. He holds the crown, yet cannot muster the will to save his country from ruin. This is the world of late 10th and early 11th century England, a patchwork realm trembling under the boots of foreign invaders, fractured in leadership, searching for hope in one who cannot provide it. The story of Æthelred begins in the year 978, overshadowed by the brutal end of his older half-brother, King Æthelred the Martyr. Edward, a teenager crowned after their father's death, falls to an assassin's blade at Corfe. Some blame factional disputes among the nobles. Others whisper that it was the doing of Æthelred's mother, the ambitious Ælfthryth. In any case, the young Edward is left lying dead, and the path is open for Æthelred, barely a boy of about 10, to inherit the throne. He does so amid swirling rumors of guilt and complicity, though historians argue about whether the child was truly involved. Either way, the stench of that murder lingers over his coronation. Early chroniclers note that his mother and a handful of influential nobles hold the real reins of power, relegating him to a puppet state. It sets a tone for a reign lacking firm leadership from the very start. Even his name, Æthelred, which literally means noble counsel, becomes an ironic twist once history dubs him the Unready. The Old English term unread signifies bad counsel or poor advice, not just ill preparedness. It captures the essence of a king whose decisions often come too late or prove self-defeating, shaped by a swirl of conflicting noble interests and his own insecurity. The weight of Edward's murder seeps into the public consciousness, undermining trust in the crown. People speak of omens and curses, seeing a monarchy cursed from its inception. For a brief moment after his coronation, relative peace prevails, a lull carried over from the successes of Alfred the Great's descendants. But by the 980s, that peace shatters. Viking raids resume in force, hitting coastal towns and probing the weaknesses of an ill-coordinated realm. Southampton is attacked, Thanet ravaged. Even London feels the sting of raiders. At first, Æthelred attempts to respond by refining the navy, an echo of Alfred's old approach. He levies taxes on shires to build more warships, but the plan falters. Local ealdormen bicker, some refusing to pay, others pocketing coin for their own private disputes. The king, young and unseasoned, cannot unify them. Inevitably, fleets stand half-built or undermanned, and raids continue with impunity. Matters escalate in 991 with the disaster at Maldon, where a Viking force defeats an English army led by Bertnoth. That defeat jolts the kingdom, but rather than forging a united front, Æthelred, guided by dubious counsel, opts to pay the Danes off. He signs a treaty that includes a payment of 10,000 pounds of silver, a sum called Danegeld, to buy temporary peace. In earlier decades, a payment might have been a short-term tactic, but here it sets a deadly precedent. The Danes realize that extortion yields more profit than quick raids. Over the next years, these tributes balloon. 10,000 becomes 16,000, then 24,000, then 48,000 pounds of silver, sums that cripple the economy and embolden invaders. The Danegeld not only drains England's treasury, but also poisons morale. Common folk resent sky-high taxes and blame the crown for not defending them. Meanwhile, the Danes use English silver to fund bigger expeditions. Each time the monarchy pays, more ships arrive. Æthelred, locked in a cycle of panic, invests in further bribes while neglecting to unify the nobility for a robust defense. Some local lords pay the Danes off themselves, forging private deals. The concept of a single cohesive realm slides toward oblivion, overshadowed by the currency of fear. Traders begin hoarding wealth rather than reinvesting, suspecting the monarchy might seize it for more Danegeld. The monarchy's authority cracks, showing the same weaknesses that had begun with the murder of Edward. Against this backdrop, a new horror unfolds in 1002. Æthelred, egged on by paranoia, signs an edict known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Convinced that Danes within his territory conspire against him, he orders a widespread killing of Danish men in England, many of whom are peaceful settlers or long-standing residents. Blood spills on the feast day, women and children among the victims. Gunhilda, said to be a relative of the formidable Sweyn Forkbeard, might be among those murdered. This action, intended to strike fear into the invaders, instead cements a vow of vengeance. Horrific stories of the massacre spread, fueling the next wave of Danish assaults with renewed fury. Instead of a demonstration of power, it becomes a catastrophic blunder that rips any moral high ground from the monarchy's grasp. What follows is relentless. Danish armies land again, no longer content with tribute alone. They ravage the coasts, torch farmland, assault towns. The monarchy, starved of coin after repeated Danegeld payments, struggles to field a decent militia. The older Anglo-Saxon system of local defense, known as the fyrd, requires each shire to raise men. But the constant drain of morale and resources erodes that system. Nobles resist the king's call, either suspecting betrayal or doubting his will to fight. Some strike private deals with Danish leaders, ensuring their local domains remain safe, for a personal price. Others attend the muster but show up late or ill-equipped, undermining the monarchy's attempts at an organized defense. Meanwhile, as new invasions press deeper inland, Æthelred issues edicts to build new ships, impose fresh taxes, or reconfigure service. But each attempt disintegrates under bickering or corruption. At times, he hires Danes as mercenaries, inadvertently increasing the monarchy's reliance on those who can be swayed by higher offers from rival raiders. Economically, the realm hemorrhages silver. The persistent tribute burdens peasants and artisans. Towns stagnate, uncertain whether to invest in trade or brace for the next assault. The monarchy's attempts to stamp out coin adulteration fail amid widespread confusion. The entire kingdom stands on the edge of anarchy, overshadowed by the brutality of repeated Danish invasions. Some might argue the Danes themselves no longer come as raiders. They come as conquerors, seeing a monarchy that lacks unity or credible force. By 1006, the gloom is palpable. Another large-scale Danish incursion sweeps across the land, leaving pyres of destruction. Chroniclers describe entire regions laid bare, with no defense in sight. The monarchy can neither coordinate a single decisive battle nor effectively buy peace. Mistrust runs high among the local ealdormen. Some suspect the king might punish them for inaction. Others suspect they'll be scapegoated for the monarchy's inability to unify. At every turn, Æthelred's counsel leads to half measures. One might see him as vacillating between paying more silver and attempting half-hearted musters that never come together properly. Soldiers, exasperated, desert or defect. Morale among the peasantry collapses further with each passing year. The next major blow falls in 1013, when King Sweyn Forkbeard arrives with a formidable Danish host, determined to take the entire realm by force. Pressure on the monarchy mounts to a fever pitch. As the Danes march deeper into English territory, multiple towns and local lords, weary of incompetent governance, submit to Sweyn's rule. They find in him a clarity of leadership, however harsh, that outshines Æthelred's confusion. Realizing the futility of standing in London while the kingdom crumbles, Æthelred flees to Normandy, the homeland of his second wife, Emma. It marks a moment of utter disgrace, an anointed king abandoning his domain rather than rallying a final defense. England, for the first time in living memory, recognizes an alien sovereign with minimal resistance. Sweyn Forkbeard effectively becomes king in all but ceremony, while Æthelred sulks in exile across the Channel. In Normandy, Æthelred's status is precarious. He is a king without a throne, reliant on Norman dukes to host him. Rumors swirl that England might well forget him, shifting loyalty to the more decisive Dane. Yet an unexpected development arises. In early 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard dies suddenly. The land, poised under new rule, is momentarily uncertain. Some English nobles, wishing to avoid a stable Danish dynasty, invite Æthelred to return, under conditions. They demand he promise better rule than before, vow to heed their counsel, and unify the realm in earnest. Desperate to reclaim his crown, Æthelred agrees. This invitation underscores just how fragmented England has become, that a dethroned monarch can be recalled with strings attached. Still, it is a fleeting advantage. The monarchy's survival rests on whether Æthelred can deliver the leadership he has so far failed to demonstrate. Reinstated, Æthelred attempts a resurrection of sorts, but time has hardened him into suspicion. He punishes old rivals, demands loyalty through intimidation, and remains locked in suspicion of any ealdorman who once doubted him. Meanwhile, the Danes have not vanished. Sveyn's son, Knut, steps into the vacuum, still controlling pockets of territory and forging alliances. If England hoped for a miraculous transformation in Æthelred's return, they see instead an aging king rehashing old mistakes. Tardy musters, misapplied taxes, combative relationships with local lords. His son, Edmund Ironside, emerges as a more dynamic figure, leading residual armies in certain clashes, but with little direct support from his father. The monarchy is split between father and son, further undermining central authority. By 1016, Æthelred falls ill in London. Viking raids intensify as Knut and other Danish warlords press their advantage. The monarchy that Alfred once built, and that later kings maintained, stands on the brink of permanent collapse. On his deathbed, Æthelred can only watch as his kingdom totters. He dies overshadowed by a conflict that has already moved beyond him, leaving the war for England to be fought by Edmund Ironside and the advancing Danes. His final days carry no triumph, no redemptive stroke, just a king recognized for dithering, for paying monstrous sums of Danegeld, and for ordering a massacre that unleashed unspeakable vengeance. Reflecting on the entire arc, one sees a monarchy undone not merely by the Vikings, though they are a savage force, but by its rulers' indecisive governance and toxic counsel. The repeated Danegeld payments broadcast weakness rather than ensuring safety. The St. Brice's Day massacre, intended as a show of strength, sows the seeds of Denmark's unrelenting wrath. The breakdown of local defense systems, the mistrust among nobles, and the final flight to Normandy all illustrate a monarchy in freefall. Peace proves ephemeral, overshadowed by wave after wave of invasion, culminating in a realm that nearly loses its identity. Historians judge Æthelred harshly, not because he lacked every virtue, but because at every crisis point, he chose half measures or ill-conceived brutality. Over a reign of nearly 4 decades, the cost is immeasurable. Yet the story also highlights deeper structural flaws. The monarchy, even under better kings, often relied on the synergy of local lords. Once they lost faith in Æthelred, no single edict or tax could salvage the situation. The unstoppable might of Danish forces hammered these local powers repeatedly, exploiting every crack in the monarchy's shaky coalition. Perhaps a stronger or more charismatic king might have repeated Alfred's feat and rallied the realm. But Æthelred's distrust, shaped partly by early traumas and the overshadowing guilt of how he came to the crown, only fragments alliances further. Local leaders see no reason to unify behind a man who stumbles from one indecision to the next. The monarchy's fiasco also left deep scars on the common people. Endless taxes, raids, and shifting loyalties devastated farmland. The coin supply bled away to pay Danegeld, spurring economic stagnation. People lost loved ones to Danish swords, or to the fiasco of internal witch hunts after the massacre. The monarchy, instead of serving as a shield, often seemed the enabler of further tragedy. That moral compromise, killing unarmed Danes, breaking trust with local communities, poisons any moral authority the throne might have held. Æthelred's final breath in 1016 closes one of the darkest chapters in the monarchy's history. It is no accident that soon afterward, English authority cedes to Canute, culminating in a foreign kingship over the once proud land. Some might see it as a cosmic justice. After all the wasted silver, the false bravado, and the violent scapegoating, the monarchy's claim to legitimacy withered. The only hope remains in new or external leadership that can unify a realm battered by a generation of failure. If Alfred's monarchy soared from near collapse to heroic resilience, Æthelred's monarchy took the opposite path, from a stable inheritance to a kingdom in tatters. In concluding, one must emphasize that Æthelred was not a cartoonish villain or a complete fool. He faced an extraordinary threat, the Danes in unprecedented force, cunning and adaptive. Nonetheless, a stronger or more decisive monarch might have repeated Alfred's approach, forging alliances, building workable defenses, and rallying the kingdom's moral center. Instead, at nearly every juncture, Æthelred's solutions either arrived too late, lacked credibility, or sowed new discord. Some blame the poor counsel he received from unscrupulous nobles, others the overshadowing guilt of Edward the Martyr's murder. But the outcome remains the same. Danegeld after Danegeld drained the kingdom. The infamous massacre invited vengeance, and repeated attempts to unify ended in fleeting illusions. When the final wave came, he took flight, leaving London and his people to fend for themselves. If there is a lasting lesson from Æthelred's reign, it lies in the cost of half-hearted measures and short-term fixes. The monarchy, already reliant on local alliances, could not afford to appear both cruel and indecisive. Paying the Danes might have offered a short respite, but it corroded the monarchy's moral authority. Resorting to mass killing on St. Brice's day incinerated the monarchy's standing, bridging no gaps, instead forging the impetus for a savage retaliation. Moreover, the repeated breakdown in forging a strong militia or navy underscores that the monarchy's attempts at defense lacked the central will to unify lords behind them. In short, every gamble backfired. A final image might capture the devastation. On a battered coastline near the Thames, a group of peasants stands amid smoldering ruins, uncertain whether another wave of Danes will appear. They speak in hushed tones of the king who was never there when truly needed, who demanded taxes but delivered no true protection, who launched a massacre that only worsened their fate. Over the horizon, a new fleet might soon appear, carrying a foreign claimant to the throne. The peasants show neither relief nor excitement, just the dull resignation that their monarchy has failed them. That is the legacy of Æthelred. A realm overshadowed by chaos, ravaged by unstoppable foes, where the throne itself becomes a symbol of mismanagement rather than a fortress of unity. As a final reflection, one might recall how some chroniclers label him Æthelred the Unready, not because he lacked resources, but because he perpetually chose unwise counsel, driven by fear, by ill-timed decisions, by the overshadowing guilt of a regicidal past, perhaps, and by a fundamental inability to galvanize the realm. In that sense, his name ironically means noble counsel, yet his reign stands as a cautionary tale about the monarchy's fragility when leadership fails to meet the demands of crisis. The cost of that failure resonates in the broken communities and lost silver, in the harrowed faces of those who survived wave after wave of Viking fury, and in the monarchy's eventual displacement by foreign kings. Where Alfred had proven that resilience and bold action could save a land from ruin, Æthelred proved the opposite. That hesitant, misguided strategies can drive a kingdom to the very precipice of oblivion. And so he passes from history with little fanfare, overshadowed by the war his son, Edmund Ironside, and the next wave of Danes would wage for ultimate control. Even in death, he leaves no legacy of redemption, only a shattered monarchy that others must rebuild. In the end, that is the final word on Æthelred the Unready, the king who, confronted with overwhelming threat, stumbled from one misjudgment to another, and in doing so, paved the way for the conquest of a land that once had every reason to stand proud and defiant, but found itself leaderless and broken when it needed unity the most.